I inherited 500 acres of land and watched the president of a powerful HOA get arrested in broad daylight for fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering, all because she thought I was too small, too broke, and too tired to fight back. By the time the FBI sealed their clubhouse doors and cut the power to their security gate, I was standing in the middle of their perfect little street holding a court order that said every inch beneath their driveways belonged to me. But that isn't how it started. It started with a cheap beer, a rattling phone call, and a moment where I honestly thought my life was about to get easier, not turn into a legal war. I was halfway through a cold beer on my back porch when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. The voice on the other end was stiff, professional, and completely detached. He told me my Uncle Jasper had passed away. We weren't close. We hadn't spoken in years. But then he said something that made my hand tighten around the bottle. Apparently, Uncle Jasper had left me something. 500 acres of land, free and clear. I laughed out loud. I actually thought it was a scam. I'd been living in a cramped 2-bedroom rental for 5 years, barely keeping my small mechanic business alive, patching together engines and transmission jobs just to stay afloat. 500 acres sounded like a fantasy. But 2 days later, I was driving out there with printed maps from the county website, and that's when everything went sideways. My GPS didn't drop me at an empty field or a dirt road. It dropped me at a pristine metal gate flanked by fake stone walls and manicured hedges. There was a big polished brass sign bolted into the stone that read, Crescent Ridge Community, HOA Managed. Inside the gate were rows of luxury homes, sidewalks so clean they looked staged, and a perfectly trimmed park with a duck pond in the center. I sat there in my beat-up truck, blinking between the sign and the deed in my hand, trying to make the two realities match. They didn't. A red light blinked on the gate camera, and a clipped voice crackled through the speaker. "Can I help you?" "Yeah," I said slowly. "I think I'm standing on my land." There was a pause. Then the voice came back sharper. "This is private property, sir. If you don't leave immediately, I'll call security." I smiled without humor. "Go ahead," I said. "Maybe they can explain why there's an entire subdivision built on land I just inherited." The gate buzzed open faster than I expected. I pulled inside and parked along the curb. I hadn't even opened my door before she came marching across the lawn toward me. Pastel tracksuit, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, shoulder-length blonde helmet hair, clipboard clutched tight like it was a weapon. Yep, definitely a Karen. "Excuse me," she snapped. "This area is for residents only." "My name's Xavier Maddox," I said, stepping out of the truck. "I just inherited this land from Jasper Maddox." Her mouth twitched. Just for a second. Then she forced a smile. "I'm Deborah Van Holt, president of the Crescent Ridge HOA, and I find it highly unlikely that you own anything here." I pulled the deed copy from my folder and held it up. She scanned it. Her face went pale. "There's obviously been a mistake," she said, quickly adjusting her sunglasses. "This community has been here for over 8 years. We've invested heavily. Roads, utilities, landscaping. You must be confused." "I'm not confused," I said, stepping closer. "You're all living on my land." She huffed. "We'll have our lawyer reach out. In the meantime, I'd ask you to leave. You're upsetting the community." I glanced around. Curtains twitched. Homeowners stood on porches pretending not to stare. One man in a suit whispered urgently into his phone. "I'll leave when I'm ready," I said, then turned and walked into the middle of the street. That was the moment it sank in. They'd built their entire HOA kingdom on land they didn't own, and now they were going to pay for it. The county clerk's office was quieter than I expected. Dusty ceiling fan rattling overhead. A woman behind the counter typing with one finger at a time. She pulled up the parcel history and turned the screen toward me. "Parcel 82B," she said. "The entire subdivision sits on it." "Was it ever sold?" I asked. She clicked a few more times. "Nope. Ownership stayed with Jasper Maddox until last month. Taxes paid every year, though." "By who?" She frowned. "Looks like a trust account. Set up about 15 years ago. "So you're telling me," I said slowly, "the HOA built a gated community without buying the land?" She squinted at the screen. "Looks that way. No sale, no lease, not even an easement." I asked her to print everything. That afternoon I walked into the office of Carla Dominguez, a real estate attorney I'd worked with once years ago. She had a personality like a wrecking ball and a memory like a steel trap. "Xavier Maddox," she said, waving me in. "Last I heard you were chasing a guy who welded his ignition coil backwards." "Still me," I said. "But now I own 500 acres under a luxury subdivision, and the HOA says I'm trespassing." That got her attention. By the time I finished laying out the documents, she was already pulling case law. "Holy hell," she muttered. "They built on your land without a title transfer. That's not negligence, that's fraud. So what does that mean for me?" "It means you've got them by the throat," she said. "Unless they can produce a valid deed, they have no legal claim. And if they've been collecting HOA dues on stolen land, that's a big problem." A week later, the HOA's lawyer sent me a cease and desist letter accusing me of harassment and trespassing. When Carla read it, she laughed. "They're bluffing," she said, "trying to scare you before the county starts digging." And dig they did. A plainclothes investigator from the district attorney's office showed up with a stack of files. Forged deeds, fake notarizations, federal grants obtained under false pretenses. "It's looking like coordinated fraud," he said. That was when I felt it. The doubt, the weight. I was a mechanic with a small shop and a beat-up truck. They were a powerful HOA with lawyers' money and political connections. For the first time, I wondered if pushing this was a mistake. There was a night I sat alone in my truck outside the gate engine, idling, staring at the houses glowing warm and safe inside. Families, kids, lawns. And I thought, maybe I should just walk away. Let the lawyers sort it out. Let someone else fight. But then I remembered Deborah's smile, the way she'd told me to leave my own land, and something hardened in my chest. The real turning point came when I found the utility lot. Fenced off, new concrete posts, security cameras, generator shed, all sitting outside the approved development zone. They weren't just careless, they were hiding things. Carla filed a quiet title action. The county opened an audit. Witnesses came forward. And then the dam broke. Deborah Van Holt had been skimming money. Small amounts at first, then bigger. Tens of thousands labeled as special assessments. Bank records tied her directly to the fraud. Emails connected her to the developer. The court ruled in my favor. I was declared the legal owner of all 500 acres. When federal agents showed up at the HOA clubhouse, cameras rolling residents watching from their porches, Deborah was escorted out in handcuffs, designer sunglasses, tennis skirt. No clipboard this time. I didn't cheer. I didn't celebrate. I just stood there watching the doors close behind her, knowing the power she'd used to bully, threaten, and steal was gone. The HOA collapsed. The board was suspended. The clubhouse was sealed. And for the first time since this started, the land felt quiet again. I stood in the middle of the street she'd once claimed was private property, breathing in, letting it end right there. They built their empire on lies, and all it took to bring it down was someone who refused to leave. Power built on fraud always collapses when it meets someone who stands their ground.